My name is Helen Mitchell, and at 68 years old, I thought I knew my place in this world. I thought I was just a mother. I thought I was just a woman who had raised children, supported a business from behind the scenes, and was content to live out my remaining years in comfort and quiet dignity. But sometimes, life has a way of showing you that what you think you know about yourself is only a fraction of the truth. Sometimes, the greatest wake-up calls come wrapped in the words of someone you love, but who doesn't love you back the way you deserve. Sometimes, you have to walk into a boardroom you never knew existed in order to finally understand the woman you've always been. This is my story. This is the story of a mother, a business owner, a woman whose legacy was hidden beneath layers of secrecy, manipulation, and the kind of family dysfunction that only gets exposed when someone decides that enough is enough. Let me take you back to where this all began, because understanding how we got here is the only way to understand what happens next. You see, my husband, Edward Mitchell, and I built everything from nothing. We were young, hungry, and we had a vision that seemed crazy to everyone around us. In 1982, we started Mitchell and Associates Manufacturing in a small warehouse on the east side of town. I was just 26 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration and a head full of ideas that people kept telling me were too ambitious for a woman my age. Edward was 28 with hands-on manufacturing experience from working in his father's garage. We had dreams. A $15,000 loan from my parents who believed in us when nobody else did, and absolutely nothing else. What we did have was determination. What we had was love for each other and for the business we were building. I didn't just support Edward's vision, I built it alongside him. While he managed the warehouse floor and the technical operations, handled the machines and coordinated the workers, I managed everything else: accounting, contracts, client relations, supplier negotiations, human resources, strategic planning. I was the behind-the-scenes architect who made sure every piece fit together. I was the one who actually understood our margins. I was the one who knew which clients were viable and which ones would drain our resources. I was the one who stayed up until midnight calculating payroll and making sure we had enough cash flow to survive another month. Edward knew how to make things, but I knew how to make money. I knew how to build a sustainable business model. I knew how to think 3 steps ahead, to anticipate market shifts, to position ourselves for growth. When Thomas was born in 1982, the same year we opened the company, I had him in January and was back at the office in March, swollen feet and all, because we couldn't afford to not have me there. My mother tried to tell me I should stay home with the baby. My in-laws made comments about how a mother's place was with her children. But I also knew that if I stepped back, we would fail. I knew that Edward needed me. The company needed me. And I needed to be there, building something that would last. When Victoria came along in 1985, I learned to bottle feed her in my office between meetings with major clients. I would be sitting with the Hendersons, discussing a 6-figure contract, with my daughter in a portable bassinet beside my desk, pumping milk between calls. I was exhausted. I was always exhausted. I was a mother, yes, but I was also a businesswoman. I was essential to everything Mitchell and Associates became, and I never once heard anyone, not Edward, Not my family, not my children, not anyone. Tell me thank you. Not really. Not in a way that acknowledged the scope of what I was doing. Edward would say, I couldn't do this without you. But what he meant was, I couldn't do this without you doing the business side, so I don't have to. What he didn't mean was, you are a co-builder. You are a co-creator. You deserve to be remembered as a co-founder. I don't say this out of bitterness. I say this out of truth. There's a difference. By the time Edward passed away in 2008, 3 weeks before his 54th birthday, sudden heart attack that no one saw coming, that shattered my entire world and left me sitting in a hospital wondering how I was going to run a $12 million company alone, how I was going to grieve and work simultaneously, how I was going to be strong for my children when I felt like my whole world was collapsing. Mitchell and Associates was generating $12 million in annual revenue. We had expanded to 3 warehouses. We had contracts with major distributors across 6 states. We had 42 employees depending on us. We had built something real, something that mattered, something that employed families and created stability and had genuine impact in our industry. And I had done most of that. I had done the strategic work. I had made the smart decisions. I had identified market opportunities and positioned us to capitalize on them. But nobody knew. Not really. Not in any official capacity. Not in a way that mattered legally. And that's when everything changed. You see, Edward had a will. He had a very specific will that he never fully explained to me, that he had drawn up quietly with a lawyer without discussing it with me or giving me any kind of heads up or explanation. I found this out later. He had done it because he was worried about what would happen if something happened to him. But instead of talking to me about his concerns, instead of asking me what I wanted, he simply decided what was best. In that will, he left the business in a trust that had me as the trustee and primary beneficiary, but with the understanding, the explicit, carefully worded understanding, that upon my death, 75% of the company would go to Thomas. Not Victoria, not in equal shares to both children. Thomas would get 75%, and Victoria would get 25%, along with some cash provisions to make it seem fair when it absolutely wasn't. The reasoning in the will was clear. Thomas was the natural leader of the company. Thomas had entrepreneurial instincts. Thomas would carry on the family legacy. Edward, despite everything I had built, despite the countless hours I had invested, despite the strategic decisions that had kept us solvent through recessions and market shifts, and the 2008 financial crisis that nearly destroyed manufacturing businesses across the country, had decided that our son was the heir apparent. And Edward had never told me. Not once in the 26 years we were married did he sit me down and say, Helen, I'm putting the company in a trust with Thomas as the majority heir. Not once did he explain his reasoning or ask my thoughts or acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I had earned an equal say in what happened to the company we built together. I found out at the reading of the will. I found out sitting in a lawyer's office with my children on either side of me. And the lawyer, a man named Gerald Hutchins, who had known Edward for 15 years, reading from the document with that careful, a practiced tone that lawyers use when they know someone in the room is about to be devastated. Thomas looked smug. I could see it in his face, could see him thinking, finally, Dad understood. I'm the real owner here. I'm the one who matters. Victoria looked shocked and betrayed, because even though she wasn't expecting anything, she certainly wasn't expecting to be written out almost entirely. And I felt the ground disappear beneath me. I felt something inside me crack and break and scatter into 1,000 pieces. The lawyer was speaking, but I barely heard the words. All I could hear was the implication, loud and clear. Edward trusted me to run the company, but he didn't trust me to own it. He trusted me to build it, but he trusted our son to benefit from it. He trusted me to spend my entire life, my best years, my energy, yeah, my genius, making money that would eventually belong to him. It was a betrayal wrapped in legal language and financial provisions. It was a betrayal wrapped in love, because Edward did love me, but it was a betrayal nonetheless. The will wasn't just about money. It was about power. It was about who got to decide the future. It was about whose vision mattered and whose voice would be listened to after I was gone. I remember Victoria reaching over and squeezing my hand. I remember Gerald saying, "Helen, would you like some water?" I remember thinking very clearly that I was going to find a way to fight this. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. Instead, I did what I had always done. I swallowed my hurt. I put on my professional face. I thanked the lawyer. I told my children not to worry, that everything would be fine. I went back to work, and I kept running Mitchell and Associates, exactly as I had always run it, exactly as Edward would have wanted it run, exactly as I knew how to run it. I threw myself into the business with even more intensity than before. I became obsessed with documentation. I kept meticulous records of every decision I made, every strategy I implemented, every client I brought in. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I was building a case. For 15 years, I was the trustee. I made every major decision. I managed the finances. I hired and fired employees. I negotiated contracts and set company direction. I did everything. I ran the company through a major recession. I led us through the pandemic. I kept everyone employed when other companies were laying people off. And Thomas worked in the company. He started as a floor supervisor and worked his way up to operations director. But he didn't run anything. He didn't have to. I ran everything. He showed up. He gave orders to people below him. He took credit for successes that had nothing to do with him. He did minimal work and expected maximum recognition. And in all those years, he never once asked me how I managed to keep everything running. Never once said, "Thank you." Never once acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, the company was thriving because of my strategic leadership, my vision, my refusal to give up even when things were hard. Never once asked me how to do anything because he assumed he already knew. Instead, what Thomas did was resent me. He resented working under my management. He resented that I was in charge. He resented that I made the final decisions. He resented that in his mind, he should have been running things all along. He resented that his father had given his mother the power instead of giving it to him directly. He started telling himself a story where he was the one being held back by a mother who couldn't let go of power, a story where he was the visionary and I was the obstacle holding him back from his destiny, a story where everything would be better if only I would step aside and let him take over, a story where his father's will had made him the owner, and therefore, eventually, He should be the one in charge. And he believed that story. He believed it so completely that he stopped seeing his mother as a person. He started seeing me as competition. He started seeing me as the enemy. I didn't know the full extent of that resentment. I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know that he had been talking to Victoria, getting into her head, making her doubt her own position in the company, convincing her that she too had been treated unfairly, that he had been convincing her that our mother, me, was being unfair, that he deserved a larger share even before my death, that I was running the company into the ground despite it growing revenue by 40% in the last decade. I didn't know he had been meeting with lawyers, planning a coup, documenting perceived failures and problems, building a case for why I should be forced out. I didn't know he had been undermining me with employees. I didn't know he had been talking to board members behind my back. I didn't know he had been planning something major. Not until the day everything exploded. It was a Thursday afternoon in March. The sun was shining through my office windows. I had just come back from a meeting with our largest client, Renaissance Architectural Supply. The meeting had gone incredibly well, better than well. They had just renewed their contract, a $50 million contract over 5 years that would secure 3 new jobs at our facility, that would give us security and stability, and the kind of growth that most companies only dream about. I had negotiated every detail of that contract. I had understood their needs, had positioned our company as the solution, had created a partnership that benefited both sides. I had done this. I had brought in this business. I had made this happen. I was feeling more alive than I had in years. I was feeling like my work mattered. It's like my vision was vindicated, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was heading back to my office to compile the documentation and prepare to make the announcement to the team when I saw Thomas in the hallway. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mom, we need to talk. In my office, now." There was something in his tone that made my stomach clench, something that told me this wasn't a normal conversation, something that told me he was about to try to hurt me, something about the way he said it, the coldness, the finality, made me understand that whatever was about to happen, it had been planned. I followed him to his office, which was right next to mine on the executive floor, and he closed the door behind me. I could see Victoria through the glass walls of the conference room across the hall, and she was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, pity, guilt, anticipation. "Sit down," Thomas said. I didn't sit. I have found in my 68 years that standing puts you in a position of power. Sitting down signals surrender. Sitting down says, "I'm ready to listen to whatever you have to say and accept it." "What's going on?" I asked. I kept my voice calm. I kept my face calm. I was already building a wall between myself and whatever was about to happen. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, sitting behind his desk in a way that was clearly meant to position himself as the authority in the room, as the person in charge. It was a power move. It was desperate. It was a 6 foot tall man trying to assert dominance over his mother by sitting behind a piece of furniture. And I've come to the conclusion that it's time for a change. It's time for real leadership. It's time for someone who has real vision to take over the day-to-day operations of this company. My heart started pounding, but I kept my face calm. He was going to try this. He was actually going to try this. He was going to look his mother in the eye and tell her that she didn't belong anymore. Thomas, let me finish, he said, holding up his hand like I was an employee he was dismissing, like I was someone beneath him. You've done a lot of good work here. You built this company with Dad. I respect that. I really do. But times have changed. The business landscape has changed. Digital marketing has changed everything. Supply chain management has changed. And frankly, you're 68 years old. It's time to think about retirement, then about legacy, about letting the next generation take over. It's time to let your son do what his father intended for him to do. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him which real vision he was talking about. Was it the vision I created when I negotiated a cost reduction deal with suppliers in 2015 that saved us $2 million annually? Was it the vision I created when I restructured our delivery logistics and cut shipping times in half, making us the fastest manufacturer in our region? Was it the vision I created when I identified the architectural market segment and pivoted us toward it when traditional manufacturing was struggling? Was it the vision I created when I brought in the Renaissance architectural supply contract this very morning that was going to secure our future for the next 5 years? Was it any of that? Or was he just tired of having to work for someone, and that someone was his mother? But I stood there, very still, and I let him continue. I needed to hear what he was going to say. I needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I've talked to Victoria, he said, and we both agree that it's time for you to step down as CEO. I'll take over as CEO and president. Victoria will take over as CFO and manage the financial side. You can stay on as an advisor or consultant if you'd like, but the days of you making the major decisions are over. The days of you running this company are finished. I can do better. I know I can. I have fresh ideas. I have energy. I have the drive to take this company to the next level. I felt something very cold settle in my chest, something ancient and protective and furious. This was it. This was the moment. This was my son, who I had raised, who I had fed, who I had sent to college and supported through his early career, who I had given every opportunity to succeed, telling me that I was obsolete, telling me that I needed to step aside so he could claim power, telling me that his father's conditional inheritance suddenly made him the owner right now, in this moment, while I was still alive, still working, still actively making decisions that were keeping this company alive and thriving. Have you talked to the board of directors? I asked carefully. The board that I appointed, the board members that I chose specifically because they understood our company's vision and respected what we built here. I've taken the liberty of preparing documentation, Thomas said, sliding a folder across his desk. It was thick. It was official looking. My stomach twisted. Inside, I was calculating. Inside, I was planning, including letters of resignation from the board members. You did what? The anger flashed across my face before I could control it. They've agreed that this is the best move for the company, he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice now. He was betting that I wouldn't check. He was betting that I would believe him. He was betting that his mother was weak. He didn't understand that his mother had been waiting for this moment for 15 years. They're ready to resign and be replaced by new board members who have confidence in my leadership and who understand the new direction I want to take the company in. A fresh start, new blood, new energy. My hands were shaking. I could feel my blood pressure rising. I could feel all the years of patience, all the years of swallowing my pride, all the years of making myself smaller, rising up inside me like a wave. Thomas, do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand what you're saying? I understand perfectly, he said, his voice cold. I'm saying that you had your time, you did your thing, you built something for your generation. But it's over now. You need to step down, or I will make your retirement forced. I will petition the board to remove you for incompetence, or outdated management practices, or whatever it takes. I have lawyers, I have documentation, and I have leverage. Your old mom. Nobody respects an old CEO. Nobody wants to work for someone your age. Let me handle this. On what grounds? I asked, my voice barely steady, even as inside I was thinking, leverage. You think you have leverage? On the grounds that I'm the majority shareholder, he said, and my entire body went cold. The words hung in the air like a threat. What did you just say? He smiled, that cold, smug smile of someone who thinks he's finally won, who thinks he's finally come out on top of his mother, who thinks he's finally going to get what his father promised him. You heard me. I'm the majority shareholder. 75% of this company belongs to me, as stipulated in Dad's will. You're the trustee, yes, but I'm the owner. And owners have rights. Owners can demand change, and I'm demanding your resignation, effective immediately, or I will take this public. I will tell everyone in this company that their CEO is too old to do her job anymore, and I will remove you. You don't want that, Mom. You don't want that shame. I stood there, not moving, not speaking, processing the fact that my son had just tried to use his father's conditional inheritance to force me out of the company I built. That he thought this was how business worked. That he thought that because Edward's will had given him a legal claim to majority ownership upon my death, he somehow had the right to take over while I was still alive and still serving as trustee. That he didn't understand the difference between being an heir and being an owner. That he thought intimidation was going to work on me. That he didn't know his mother at all. I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at my son, trying to intimidate his mother into surrender, and I understood that he had made a terrible mistake. And I smiled. I actually smiled. I looked at him and I said, very calmly, very quietly, I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. You'll be receiving the official notice. And then I walked out of his office. That's when it started. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 15 years. I opened the safe in my home office, the safe that I had kept hidden from everyone, the safe that contained documents Edward had signed, documents that proved I was more than just a trustee, documents that proved I was a founder. I pulled out those papers with hands that were shaking. I called my lawyer. I called the board members. I sent formal letters to everyone requesting their presence at an emergency meeting. I didn't ask about Thomas's letter. I didn't ask whether they had already agreed to resign. I simply called the meeting. I let them wonder what I knew. I let them wonder if I had found out about the coup before it was complete, and I prepared myself for battle. The next morning, the boardroom was full. All four board members were there. Sandra Williams, our CFO, who had worked with me for 12 years and who I trusted completely. Robert Chang, our manufacturing consultant, who understood our operations better than anyone except me. Angela Harris, our client relations director who had seen me close the biggest deals in our company's history. And Dr. Marcus Thompson, the warehouse manager and my dear friend who had been with us since the company started in 1982, who had worked alongside both Edward and me, who knew the truth. Thomas was there, looking confident, arms crossed, but I could see the anxiety in his jaw. Victoria was there, looking nervous, looking guilty, looking like someone who was beginning to understand that she had made a terrible mistake in trusting her brother's version of events. And I was there, dressed in the kind of power suit that had been my uniform for 4 decades. Deep purple, pressed to perfection, with my grandmother's diamond brooch pinned over my heart. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," I said, not sitting down but standing at the head of the table where I had sat for 15 years. "I've called this meeting because there are some critical legal and structural matters we need to address regarding company ownership, management authority, and decision-making power." Thomas opened his mouth to say something, but I held up my hand. The room fell silent. "I have documentation here," I continued, spreading out papers across the table. 41 years of documentation. These are official corporate records from 1982, showing that Mitchell and Associates was registered as a partnership between Edward Marshall Mitchell and Helen Marie Mitchell, with Helen Marie Mitchell listed as Chief Strategic Officer and co-architect of the business plan. That's me. I was not a supporting role. I was not a helpmate. I was a co-founder. I watched the board members' faces shift. I saw the understanding begin to dawn on them. They hadn't known. Of course they hadn't. Thomas had made sure they didn't know anything except what he'd told them, which was, apparently, a version of events where I was an aging CEO clinging to power, where I was the obstacle to their company's future. Furthermore, I continued, I am presenting documentation of my role in the day-to-day strategic operations of this company for the past 41 years, including, but not limited to, the architectural pivot that saved us during the 2008 financial crisis, when the entire manufacturing sector was collapsing, the client relations restructuring that increased revenue by 30% in 2015, the supply chain optimization that has saved us $4 million annually since 2018, and the contract negotiations that brought in the Renaissance Architectural Supply account this week, which, for those of you who haven't heard yet, has just committed to a $50 million renewal contract that will secure our future for the next 5 years. I let that sink in. I could see the board members doing the math. I could see them understanding what had actually happened here. I could see Robert Chang looking at Thomas with an expression of absolute betrayal. "I am also presenting," I said, my voice steady and calm, "a legal document from 1995 in which Edward Mitchell, my late husband, granted me, as future trustee, the authority to petition for a review of inheritance terms should I determine that such terms were based on factual inaccuracies regarding the company's actual structure, founding, and management contributions." I pulled out that document. I watched Thomas look at it, and I saw something like panic flicker across his face. For the first time, I think he understood that his mother had been prepared, that I had been waiting, that I had not simply accepted his father's will as the final word on my life and my legacy, that I didn't know he'd been planning a coup for years. Therefore, I said, I am hereby filing a formal petition to restructure the company's inheritance terms in accordance with the actual contribution and actual role in the company's success. This will require a vote of the board and legal review. But what this means, in practical terms, is this. Rather than 75% ownership going to Thomas based on assumptions about his father's role, and 25% going to Victoria, the company will be restructured so that majority ownership, 60%, will remain in trust with me as trustee until my death, at which point it will be divided equally between Thomas and Victoria at 50% each. Thomas will retain the option to become CEO and lead day-to-day operations, but his compensation and decision-making authority will be comparable to that of Victoria as co-leader of the company. Both of my children will have equal stakes. Both will have equal voice, and both will inherit based on actual value and contribution, not on outdated assumptions made by a man who, while I loved him dearly, was not aware of the full scope of my role in building this empire. The silence in that room was absolute. I could have heard a pen drop. I could have heard a heart breaking. I could have heard the moment when Thomas understood that he had lost. Furthermore, I said, because I wasn't done, effective immediately, I am announcing that Mitchell and Associates has just secured a $50 million contract with Renaissance Architectural Supply, representing the largest contract in our company's history. This contract will be managed by a joint leadership team consisting of myself as strategic lead, Victoria as financial lead, and Thomas as operations lead. All three of us working together, understanding that this company was built by vision and innovation and hard work. It was built by a woman who worked 60-hour weeks while raising two children. It was built by a man who knew how to make things with his hands. And it will continue to be built by a family that understands that legacy isn't something you claim. It's something you earn. It's something you build. It's something you work for. I sat down then. I folded my hands in front of me on the table. And I waited. Thomas stood up so fast his chair fell backward. It clattered on the floor like an exclamation point. This is a power grab, he said, his voice shaking with anger. This is you refusing to let go. This is you trying to control everything just like you always have. This is justice, I said quietly. This is me choosing, for the first time in 41 years, to claim what I built instead of watching my children fight over a version of history that isn't even accurate. You're destroying this company, Thomas said. You're destroying everything Dad built. Your father built it with me, I said, meeting his eyes directly. Every single thing, side by side. And if he were here, if he were sitting in this room, I think he would finally understand that. I think he would finally see that the woman who stood beside him wasn't just supporting his vision. She was creating it. She was the one with the strategic mind. She was the one who understood the market. She was the one who kept us alive when things were hard. Victoria had tears streaming down her face. She wasn't crying out of sadness. She wasn't crying out of guilt, though there was some of that. She was crying out of a kind of recognition, I think. A recognition that she had been validated. that her mother had finally, after all these years, chosen herself. That her mother had finally stood up and said, I matter. I built this. I deserve to be acknowledged. I'm not asking for your approval, I said to Thomas. I'm not asking you to understand. What I'm asking is that you decide whether you want to be part of this company's future as a valued executive or whether you want to walk away. But what you don't get to do anymore is take from this company while minimizing the woman who made it what it is. That ends today. That ends right now. And that ends with this board vote. The board vote happened 30 minutes later. All 4 board members voted in my favor. The petition to restructure the inheritance terms passed unanimously. Thomas abstained from voting, stared straight ahead, and said nothing. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He didn't try to present his side. He just sat there, in understanding finally that he had lost, that his mother had been stronger than him all along. That night, I went home to my house, the house Edward and I bought in 1987 with money we earned together, the house I had paid the mortgage on through my salary, the house that had always been mine whether the paperwork said so or not. And I sat in my garden, watching the sun set over the azaleas I had planted 20 years ago, and I let myself cry. Not because I had won. I had known, somewhere in my heart, that I would win. I had known because I had built something real, something that couldn't be taken away because it was, fundamentally, mine, something that nobody could give me or take from me because I had created it. I cried because I had spent 41 years making myself smaller, smaller than my accomplishments, smaller than my intelligence, smaller than my value. I cried because my own husband, a man I had loved completely, a man I had devoted my life to, had looked at what we built together and had seen only his contribution. I cried because my son had looked at his mother and had seen only an obstacle. And I cried because it had taken a moment of them trying to take everything for me to finally stand up and say, this is mine. I built this. I earned this. And I'm not apologizing for it anymore. In the weeks that followed, Thomas resigned from Mitchell and Associates. He cited philosophical differences in his resignation letter, which is a polite way of saying he couldn't stand to work under his mother anymore, now that his mother had stopped pretending to be invisible. I received a few angry calls from relatives who thought I had been too harsh, too ambitious, too willing to let a business come between family. But I also received calls from women, so many women, who had built things, who had managed things, who had created things, and who had been erased from the narrative of their own accomplishment. I heard from a woman who had been the silent partner in a tech startup for 15 years and had finally claimed her co-founder status. I heard from a woman who had organized her family's real estate business for 2 decades and had finally demanded equal ownership. I heard from women who had been working in business with their husbands or their sons or their fathers, who had been making the strategic decisions and managing the day-to-day operations, who had been invisible, and who were now, because of my story, finding the courage to claim what was theirs. I heard from women who were thanking me for showing them that it's possible to choose yourself without having to choose against your family. That it's possible to claim your power without having to burn down your relationships. That it's possible to stand up and say, I built this, without being labeled as difficult or ambitious or unwilling to let go. Victoria took the co-leadership position. She's brilliant in financial management, and it turns out she had been harboring resentment of her own about being left out of the will entirely, about being told that her brother mattered more, about being valued at 25% while her brother was valued at 75. We talk about it now. We talk about what it means to be women in business, to build things, to have those things recognized. We talk about what it meant for our family to finally have a woman at the center of the narrative who wasn't apologizing for being there. We talk about the ways that families can hurt each other, and the ways that love can be weaponized, and the ways that legacy can be used as a tool of control. And we talk about healing. We talk about what it looks like to move forward when someone you love has tried to erase you. As for Thomas, I hope someday he understands. I hope someday he looks back and sees that his mother wasn't the obstacle to his success. His mother was the architecture of his entire world. I hope he understands that the greatest inheritance a parent can give a child isn't money or power or a percentage of a company. It's the example of a woman who knew her worth and wasn't willing to negotiate it anymore. It's the example of someone who chose herself, not instead of her family, but because she was part of that family and she deserved to be treated with the respect that entails. If you're watching this and you feel like you're being erased, like your contributions are being minimized, like your voice is being silenced in your own narrative, I want you to know something. Stand up, document your work, know your rights, understand the legal and financial structures that govern your world, and don't wait for someone else to give you permission to claim what you've built. Because the permission you need, the only permission that matters, is the permission you give yourself. Because you do matter. Your contributions matter. Your legacy matters. And it's time you started believing it. The days that followed were some of the hardest and most liberating days of my life. I had to face the reality that my son had attempted a corporate coup, that he had been planning this for years, that he had been waiting for me to grow old enough and tired enough that I would finally step aside. I had to face the fact that Edward, despite his love for me, had made assumptions about our son based on traditional ideas about inheritance and legacy. I had to face the fact that I had enabled all of this by staying silent, by not claiming my role, by letting myself be the invisible architect while my family took the credit. But I also had to face the power that came from finally standing up and saying, I see what I built. I see my own value, and I'm claiming it. What happened in that boardroom wasn't just about the law, though the law was important. It wasn't just about the money, though the financial security mattered. What happened in that boardroom was a mother who had spent 41 years making herself smaller, who had spent 4 decades supporting other people's visions and other people's names, finally standing up and saying, I exist, I matter, I built this empire, and I deserve to be the one remembered for it. There's something profound that happens when you finally stop apologizing for taking up space, when you finally stop waiting for permission to claim what you've built, when you finally understand that self-respect is not the same as selfishness. My therapist, yes, I started seeing a therapist after all of this because processing family trauma requires professional help. She said something that changed everything for me. She said, Helen, your son learned from watching his father that women's work doesn't count. He learned that a woman can build a company from nothing, can run it for 40 years, can make every strategic decision, and still not be the owner. He learned that her contributions are supporting roles, not starring roles. That wasn't Thomas's fault. That was a system that failed to value women. But then she said, and you taught him something different in that boardroom. You taught him that there's a limit to how far a woman can be pushed. You taught him that eventually the invisible woman becomes visible. That was a gift, Helen. That was a difficult, painful, necessary gift. I've thought about that every day since. I don't know if Thomas will ever appreciate that gift. I don't know if he will ever understand that his mother's refusal to disappear was actually her greatest act of love. Because if I had just stepped aside, if I had just let myself be erased, what message would I have sent? I would have sent the message that a woman's legacy doesn't matter, that her contributions can be taken and given to her son, that invisibility is the price of motherhood. And I couldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. Not for Thomas, not for Victoria, not for myself. What I did in that boardroom, I did for every woman who is reading this right now and feeling like she doesn't matter. For every woman who has built something and watches someone else take credit. For every woman who has managed to be everything: a mother, a businesswoman, a supportive partner, and still feels like she's failed because nobody acknowledges what she's actually done. You don't have to wait for permission. You don't have to wait for your family to finally realize your value. You don't have to spend 40 years proving yourself to people who have already decided not to see you. You can stand up. You can claim what's yours. You can say, with absolute certainty, I built this, and the world doesn't get to decide whether that matters. You do. The weeks following the board meeting were marked by a strange kind of grief. Thomas had resigned, which meant he was gone from the company. But he was also gone from my family in a way I hadn't anticipated. I expected anger from him. I expected him to fight. But what I got instead was silence. He didn't call. He didn't email. He didn't try to reconcile or explain himself. He just disappeared. I tried not to let it hurt more than it already did. I tried to remember that he was the one who had tried to take everything from me. I tried to remember that he was the one who had looked at his mother and seen an obstacle instead of a person. But he was still my son, and that grief sat alongside my vindication in a way that made everything feel more complicated. Victoria, on the other hand, became closer to me than she had been in years. The moment her brother stepped back, she stepped forward. She took her position as co-leader seriously. She worked with me to understand every detail of the Renaissance architectural supply contract. She began to ask the kinds of questions that show real engagement and real care, not just about the business, but about my vision for what we were building. We had long conversations in my office about what it means to be a woman building something in a male-dominated industry. She asked me about decisions I had made, strategies I had used, risks I had taken. She actually listened when I answered. She actually wanted to learn. And in those conversations, I realized that this was what I had hoped for all along. Not for her to simply inherit something, but for her to understand what it means to build it. The hardest moment came about 2 months after the board meeting. I was in my office, working late as I often do, when I received a call from my sister-in-law, Edward's sister, Margaret. "Helen," she said, and I could hear the weight in her voice immediately. "I'm calling because I think you should know something. Thomas called me. He's been calling a lot of family members. He's telling them that you've become tyrannical, that you've abandoned any pretense of being a mother, and you're purely focused on holding on to power. He's saying that you forced him out of the company, that you embarrassed him publicly, that you chose a business over your own son." I felt my stomach drop. I felt all the old doubts come rushing back. Was he right? Had I been too harsh? Had I prioritized the business over my son's dignity and feelings? Had I crossed a line? "Helen," Margaret continued, "I'm calling because I know you and I know what you built. And I want you to know that I believe you. I want you to know that what you did was right. Edward and I used to argue about that, Will. Did you know that? I told him he was making a mistake. I told him that he was erasing you, but he thought he was protecting something. I never understood what. But what you did in that boardroom, Helen, that was protection. That was self-respect. That was a mother showing her children that their mother matters." I cried after that call. I cried because for a moment I had doubted myself. And I cried because Margaret's words reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, that there are people who see me, that there are people who recognize my worth, that there are people who understand that choosing yourself is not the same as abandoning your family. It is not the same as being tyrannical. It is not the same as choosing a business over your children. It is choosing to matter. In the months that followed, business was extraordinary. The Renaissance architectural supply contract delivered everything we had promised. We brought on the 3 new employees. We expanded our capacity. The revenue projections that I had made were not just met, they were exceeded. And Victoria was there every step of the way, learning, asking questions, taking initiative. She was becoming a real leader. She was becoming a real partner in what we had built. As for Thomas, I heard through mutual friends that he had started his own business, a manufacturing business, which makes sense given his background. I don't know if it will succeed. I don't know if he will remember the lessons he should have learned from working in mine. But I have to believe that someday, maybe years from now, he will understand. He will understand that his mother wasn't holding him back. His mother was holding the company up so that he and his sister had something to inherit, something to learn from, something to build on. He will understand that the day I stood in that boardroom and claimed what was mine was not a power grab. It was a reckoning. A reckoning with a system that says women should make things but not own them, should build things but not be credited for them, should lead companies but not be acknowledged as leaders. That boardroom meeting was not just about me and my son. It was about every woman who has ever been erased, minimized, or told that her contribution didn't count. It was about showing that it's never too late to reclaim your narrative. It's never too late to say, I built this, I earned this, I deserve to be remembered for it. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear this, if you are someone who needs to hear this right now, please share it. Subscribe to Voices of Miss Lorraine for more stories about women who chose themselves, who stood up, who refused to be erased. And if you're going through something similar right now, if you're dealing with family business drama, if you're struggling with being invisible in your own company, if you're questioning whether you deserve to claim what you've built, drop a comment. Let me know. Because we're all in this together, all of us trying to be seen, all of us trying to matter, all of us trying to claim the space we've earned. You matter. Your contributions matter. Your legacy matters. And it's time you started believing it. I want to be honest about what this journey has cost me. It has cost me a relationship with my son that I may never recover. It has cost me family harmony. It has cost me the comfort of not knowing the full extent of his resentment and his plans. But what it has given me back is immeasurable. It has given me my own life. It has given me the right to say, without apology, I matter. I built this. It has given me a daughter who sees me as a real person, not just a supporting role in her brother's story. It has given me employees who understand that their CEO is a visionary, not just a figurehead. It has given me a company that grows stronger every quarter because it's finally being led by someone who has always known what she was doing. It has given me the right to live the last decades of my life on my own terms, claiming my own victories, owning my own legacy. To the women watching this, please don't wait as long as I did. Please don't spend 40 years making yourself smaller. Please don't let your family's inability to see you become your inability to see yourself. The moment you realize you've been building something incredible, claim it. Don't wait for a coup attempt. Don't wait for your son to try to force you out. Don't wait for your husband's will to be read. Don't wait for anyone to give you permission. You are the permission. You are the authority. You are the architect of your own life, and nobody gets to erase that. To the children watching this, understand that when your mother stands up and claims her legacy, she's not rejecting you. She's showing you what it looks like to have self-respect. She's teaching you that love doesn't mean invisibility. She's demonstrating that you can honor your family relationships while also honoring yourself. That's the greatest gift a parent can give. I stand in my office sometimes and I look around at what we've built. I look at the awards on the walls. I look at the contracts framed from major clients. I look at the photographs of our employees at company events, their faces full of pride because they work for a company that's thriving. I look at the financial reports that show consistent growth year over year, and I see my fingerprints on every single thing. I don't feel the need to tell everyone that I did this anymore. The work speaks for itself. The company speaks for itself. But more importantly, I know it. I know what I've built. I know the value of my own contribution. And that knowledge, that absolute certainty about my own worth, is something that no boardroom meeting can take away. No will can diminish it. No sun can steal it from me. I own it. It's mine. And that is the greatest victory of all. To anyone who has tried to take what belongs to you, who has tried to erase your contribution, who has tried to make you smaller, know that there is someone who will stand up eventually. Know that the invisible woman will become visible. Know that the day of reckoning will come. And when it does, I want you to remember this. The strongest power isn't the power to take. The strongest power is the power to claim what's already yours.